Despite good sales, it can be argued that Call of Duty was in dire straits from 2013 to 2018. With more and more focus on setting the games in both the near and distant future, older fans of the series began drifting away, and newer fans weren't as loyal as they once were. In the height of Call of Duty's popularity, the game was all-consuming for its players. By 2018, though, many were often lured away by other casual multiplayer games in the market, such as Fortnite and Overwatch. And for those looking for a more hardcore, realistic experience, Ubisoft's Rainbow Six Siege provided many with the outlet they desired. For many, 2018's Black Ops 4 was a final straw. Instead of offering a compelling narrative and multiplayer suite, developer Treyarch spent 3 years focusing on expanding their zombies output while seemingly ignoring the other modes. For the first time since the series' inception, the game did not have a campaign mode, and the multiplayer was full of gimmicks to compete with the glut of hero shooters that had entered the market. Worse yet, as a replacement for the campaign, Treyarch added in a Battle Royale mode to further capitalize on current trends. Between stiff competition and the game seemingly not offering as much value as previous titles, Black Ops 4 did well, but not as well as was normal. Activision is said to have not been satisfied with its sales, and for the first time in years, a Call of Duty game wasn't the best-selling game of the year in the US. That honor went to Red Dead Redemption 2. For many, 2019 looked bleak when it came to the next Call of Duty release, as excitement for the series seemed to be at a critical low. Thankfully, sister studio Infinity Ward provided just the shot of adrenaline the franchise needed with their reboot of Modern Warfare. Between a more in-depth multiplayer, overhauled controls, an all-time great campaign, and the introduction of Warzone during the global pandemic, the series went from one of their all-time lows to one of their all-time highs in just 6 months. For 2020's release, all Sledgehammer Games had to do was not mess it up. However, that seems to be the only thing they're good at. While we don't know the full extent of what happened behind the scenes, the end result is that Sledgehammer was taken off of Call of Duty 2020 and Treyarch was put in to replace them on short notice. Given the situation, it would have been easy for 2020's game to crash and burn. Not only did they get a shortened development time by about 18 months or so to get a finished product out the door, but they also had to work during the early stages of the pandemic when no one had a clue what was going on and many were working from home. Lesser teams would have probably crumbled under the pressure, but Treyarch managed to get their next Black Ops game out the door on time. What probably helped accomplish this feat is that, once again, Treyarch didn't bother making a campaign mode and worked solely on multiplayer and zombies. But, as we all know, this game does have a campaign mode, so if Treyarch didn't make it, then who did? Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce you to Raven Software. Founded in 1990, Raven spent their early years working on games alongside id Software before being bought by Activision in 1997. Still able to act as a free agent for a time, some games of note they've worked on include Star Wars Jedi Knight 2, Star Wars Jedi Academy, X-Men Legends 1 and 2, Marvel Ultimate Alliance, Quake 4, and Singularity. Their first involvement with Call of Duty began in 2010 with Black Ops. Aside from being the primary developer of the Nintendo DS version, they assisted with churning out DLC packs for Black Ops and then later Modern Warfare 3. From there, they became the standard support studio, finding themselves on the same hold teams such as Beanox and High Moon Studios also found themselves in. In 2016, they got some notable spotlight when they became the lead developers in charge of remastering the original Modern Warfare game to be included with Infinite Warfare that fall. Of the two games, the Modern Warfare remaster was the one most people were paying attention to. After the remaster released to critical acclaim, Raven must have had a pretty good working relationship with Infinity Ward, as they assisted in the development of Warzone. From there, they were partnered with Sledgehammer for 2020's release. The story is that Sledgehammer would work on the multiplayer and zombies while Raven worked on the campaign. As we understand it, this was a joint development, with both studios sharing a unified vision. Clearly, the two parties never ended up seeing eye to eye, hence the removal of Sledgehammer off the project. Official details of how things came together are sketchy, so I'll do my best to interpret them going forward. What I infer from Sledgehammer being removed from the project means that they were more than likely the source of development troubles. Also, given the development time given to Treyarch and Raven afterward, I doubt they spent much time going back to the drawing board, so here's what I think happened. Raven wanted to make a game set in the Cold War while Sledgehammer wanted another crack at World War II. Once split up, Sledgehammer went on to make Vanguard while Treyarch and Raven salvaged the Cold War idea. From here, Black Ops Cold War was born. While this game has its flaws, I can't help but admire it. While at times to me it feels like a separate game being squeezed into the Black Ops universe, there's so much love and care from Raven for this series, specifically the first game, that I find some of these issues not a huge deal. It can be argued with this title, Raven is showing more care for the series than Treyarch had in 8 years. So, let's rewind the clock and forget about all that nonsense about Frozen Force and Battle Royales in the future and revisit a time long past, a time that Treyarch forgot about, a time when storytelling was actually important in a Call of Duty game. First off, I want to comment about the fact that I find it hilarious that this game is called Black Ops Cold War and not Black Ops 5. While early leaked promo art showcased a Roman numeral 5 in the logo, they ultimately went with the Cold War subtitle instead of a number. To me, this seems to be a bit of an admission that the series went off the rails with 3 and 4. By calling this game Cold War, we're recontextualizing and redefining what the series means. In this game, we can easily ignore everything that happens in the future as we're brought back to the 1980s. Ronald Reagan has just been sworn in as President of the United States, but a new administration means business as usual for the CIA. Following the inauguration, the 400-day-long Iranian hostage crisis has come to an end. To the world, it appears amicable, but to those on the inside, the US wants blood and those responsible buried 6 feet under. After a stellar opening montage setting the stage for where we find things, we now find Alex Mason and Frank Woods in Amsterdam, where 2 of the masterminds behind the crisis are hiding. They're not alone though, and are joined by newcomer to the series, Russell Adler. Right off the bat, we're seeing Raven give some respect back to the series. Not only are we beginning our story based on real-world history and not made-up sci-fi mumbo-jumbo, but we're also revisiting classic characters and familiar elements. For instance, Raven recreates the opening to the Cuba mission from the original Black Ops with the cigar opening our scene, only this time it's Mason burning a picture. Now, there is one downside to revisiting some of these classic characters, and that's the original voice actors for Mason and Woods don't reprise their roles in Cold War. No official reason has been given for why, but if I had to guess, it had something to do with a combination of scheduling and probably money. As nice as it is to see these characters back in their prime, it's a little distracting to hear new voices coming out of them. I'll give Woods' actor credit that he's at least trying to sound like James C. Burns, but more often than not, it comes off as a really bad impression.
They found where I was being held prisoner with a spy satellite. One of them KH-9s. This was not the digital age. This film had to be processed, analyzed, and delivered. All by hand.
Yeah, then a lot of innocent people are gonna die. Yamato. I thought Hudson and Weaver buried that place years ago.
The biggest sticking point for me is Mason, though. Mason's new voice actor sounds nothing like Sam Worthington to the point that it's distracting.
I don't know what you're talking about.
The numbers, Mason. What do they mean? Where are they broadcast?
I don't know anything about any numbers.
Castro. We went in to kill Castro.
Steiner. Send me in Woods. Time to pay Ivan a visit.
But questionable recasting choices aside, let's get back to the story. Mason, Woods, and Adler have tracked down 2 of the masterminds behind the hostage crisis to Amsterdam and are going to bring them in dead or alive. Right off the bat, we get thrown into the thick of things and engage in a shootout across rooftops. While one of the targets escapes, we manage to capture the other, and we're introduced to one of the new mechanics in the game. Like Black Ops 2, Cold War has a slightly branching narrative with multiple endings to missions that can affect the outcome of the story. Our first choice is to keep this guy alive or to execute him when we're through with him. While this choice doesn't have a great impact on the story as we get our intel from him either way, it's a good introduction to the concept. Options like this are scattered all over the game, and I'll get back to some decisions that do have a greater consequence later. For now, we move on to an airstrip in Turkey where we find the other mastermind finishing off some loose ends before he makes his escape. A car chase, shootout, and quick RCXD explosion later, and we've got everything about wrapped up. But our target lets slip that this isn't as over as we think it is.
Should have freaked the hostages when you had the chance!
Hostages. It was never about the hostages. His plan is already underway. You won't be able to stop him this time.
Stop who?
Perseus.
Perseus is the codename given to Russian spies involved with the Manhattan Project that were accused of stealing national secrets for the Soviet Union. There have been several spies suspected of being Perseus over the years, but the agent is often considered to be more myth than reality. However, Russell Adler claims to have had direct contact with Perseus at times and believes him to be real. Going off what little they know, President Reagan dispatches Adler to form a clandestine group of Western agents to track down Perseus and put an end to his schemes. Providing assistance is Jason Hudson, once again voiced by a different actor, along with Mason and Woods acting as field agents. Besides the characters we know, Adler also brings in his own team. There's MI6 Agent Park, Sims, who served with Adler in Vietnam, former Israeli intelligence officer Lazar, and finally our new playable character Bell. Unlike in Black Ops 3, the player gets to determine more than just what our character looks like. From choosing the character's background to selecting which skills would best suit them, the player has full control over Bell's identity. While Bell never speaks, the player gets to select dialogue for them at times, better putting us in a moment and making the character ours. And to better get involved with the story, we return often to the Safehouse, where we select our missions and go over gathered intelligence. The intel found in missions is used to unlock 2 separate operations to help flesh out Perseus' allies. I think all of this is great. So far, Cold War has taken the best things about Black Ops 2 and 3 and is refining them and making them work much better than the first time these features were implemented. This time, the Safehouse serves more of a purpose than just being a hub to ready equipment with your squad in between missions. Going over intel really helps you feel like a spy investigating leads with the clues you find along the way. You can also listen to characters have their own conversations and grow as a team and have your own conversations with them. Meanwhile, my big gripe in Black Ops 2 is that the branching narrative made the overall story weaker, as so many elements are being juggled at once that it was possible to wind up with a bit of a lackluster ending. In Cold War, these other missions are more or less side objectives that don't impact too much of the main narrative. So while I suppose they could be skipped, it does help give the player a feeling like they're really involved with the way the story turns out. And there are still multiple endings depending on certain choices the player makes later on, but we'll get to that later. For now, Adler and Bell have a job to do and think back to their time in Vietnam and their first brush with Perseus. It happened during a secret operation known as Fracture Jaw. In reality, this is an actual plan that involved the possible use of nuclear weapons in Vietnam. It was abandoned once public opinion clearly turned against the idea, but for the game's premise, they're saying it got much further to reality than we ever thought. Back during the war, Adler, Sims, and Bell were tasked with escorting a nuclear warhead from the base where it was kept to a safer location. Along the way, they stop in a village and find evidence of Soviet involvement, finding an encrypted dossier in a secret room. Continuing on, Raven pays homage to the original Black Ops once again by including a helicopter mission. Fighting our way to the US base, Adler and co. grab the nuclear warhead but are shot down and have to fight off several waves of North Vietnamese troops before an airstrike clears out the enemy. With the trip down memory lane over, Bell takes another crack at the dossier and manages to uncover some new leads. The team discovers an arms dealer working for Perseus and head to East Berlin to track him down. This mission may be my favorite in the game. Even more than the original Black Ops, this mission in East Berlin really focuses on being a spy during the Cold War. You have to evade patrol, search for clues, and track your target. They even give you a tiny little camera to do all this with. If I have one complaint, it's that if you end up getting spotted, there's no going back into stealth. All the guards are just immediately magnetized to your location and know where you are. Normally, I'd be a little more critical of this, but I know stealth takes a while to program, and they were short on time with this one, so I won't be too hard on them. If anything, I just need to be better at not being spotted. This level also has its own side objectives and choices sprinkled throughout. First is the option to rescue an East Berlin informant from the Stasi to keep your cover. However, if Bell finds a note, it will reveal that he's actually a mole for the KGB. If you don't kill him, he'll pop up again later. Next, Bell has to sneak into a family apartment to place a tracker in a briefcase. This section had me on the edge of my seat. You think it's just the KGB agent and his wife, but then you hear a kid's voice from upstairs, meaning there's one more person to possibly catch you. If the wife sees you, the player needs to tranquilize her and hide her body. But either way, Bell ends up finding a secret room with the briefcase and a CIA agent tied up inside. This distraction gets him captured and he ends up in front of Volkov, the man Adler's team had been after. When the team comes to rescue him, they fight their way through Volkov's guards and the player has the option to kill or capture him. If you want to keep him alive, be careful, as beating him over the head with your gun proves to be fatal and doesn't knock him out like I was assuming. There's a button prompt to take him alive. Upon returning to the safe house, the team digs through the intel they got from Volkov's operation and find an installation in Ukraine that has ties to Perseus. Adler sends Woods and Bell to investigate, and what they find is a Spetsnaz training ground created to look like an American town. This section is really cool, I think. After a slower mission in East Berlin, this one ramps up the action a bit more and has what I think is a neat location in the training module. Now, not to harp on the new voice actors too much, but this mission in particular, I feel like the writing for Woods is a little out of character and really makes him feel like a cheap stand-in. Not to be cliche with criticisms at this point, but I'd even go so far as to say that the writing for Woods verges on Marvel dialogue territory.
She sounds mad. Does she sound mad? They turned buggy. Nothing sacred.
Woods also seems to have an obsession with Burger Town and takes great offense to the fact that the Russians have supposedly stolen the burger chain's mascot to put in their training sim. I don't know, something about grizzled commando Frank Woods having a soft spot for a particular fast food chain seems a little odd to me. But anyway, after taking out everyone that stands in their way, Woods and Bell uncover something known as Project Greenlight, and that it has ties back to the CIA. With enemies descending on them from all directions and with a job to do, Bell and Woods hijack an enemy BTR and break out of the training facility. Returning to the safe house, Woods gets Hudson to spill the beans about what's going on. Project Greenlight was initiated under the Eisenhower administration to halt a Soviet invasion of Europe. Their plan? Hide nuclear weapons across the continent and detonate them should the Soviets ever get a foothold. 8 weeks prior to the events of the game, one of the Greenlight nukes went offline. Based on what was found in the briefcase in Berlin and now on the computers at the training ground, Hudson knows Perseus has somehow stolen one of the nukes and intends to use it against the US. Needing information on Perseus' next move and thinking it's likely he'll try to utilize sleeper agents, Mason Woods head to Mount Yamantau, the same mountain and secret installation that Hudson and Weaver infiltrated years earlier in their search for Dr. Steiner and the knowledge behind the numbers program. This mission, known as Echoes of a Cold War, is another testament to Raven's reverence for the original Black Ops game. Mason and Woods get to explore the snowed under and damaged installation, and the player can find several Easter eggs scattered throughout the area.
Crossbow bolt.
Looks like Hudson had some fun.
Yeah, that's not how he remembers it.
Working their way through the facility, Woods and Mason find what Perseus is looking for, the old computer mainframe with a list of Dragovich's sleeper agents on it. With help from a mole in the KGB, they lift the mainframe out of the mountain and make their getaway. After the CIA takes a look at it, though, it's revealed that Perseus already got what he wanted and erased the data on it, meaning that the only place left to find the information they need is inside KGB headquarters in Moscow. Before moving on to the next mission, though, I want to discuss some more behind-the-scenes stuff involving this game, as Echoes of a Cold War I think is a good example of how this campaign was torn apart and stitched back together. We've established that this game was originally something different and then turned into a Black Ops game after the fact. While it works overall, you can easily see the seams if you look hard enough. If I had to guess, the original setting of the game was the Cold War and focused on the new characters introduced here. Adler, Park, Lazar, and Sims are featured in a majority of the cutscenes and the main gameplay missions. Meanwhile, returning characters like Mason, Woods, and Hudson are used more sparingly. They're used so sparingly that you could almost remove them from the game entirely and you'd miss nothing. In terms of the overall plot, Echoes of a Cold War doesn't actually contribute to the main plot at all. While a cool homage to the original Black Ops, nothing that happens in the mission overall matters to the plot, other than being a more linear mission to help separate two more open-ended missions. They say in the next immediate cutscene that Perseus wiped the drives, meaning that KGB HQ is the only place to find the intel they're looking for. Again, this is just me taking a guess, but it almost feels like Echoes of a Cold War was created and slotted into the list of missions to give Mason Woods more screen time. But because of how the story is already written, they couldn't have it do too much for the plot. In terms of their screen time across the rest of the campaign, it's often that you'll hear Woods over a comlink but never actually see him, making it easier to add him or Mason into the story. As for Woods appearing in Red Light, Green Light, I'm assuming that originally another character like Adler or Lazar was infiltrating the KGB base with you and swapped the characters around at some point. The two optional side operations are also the same way, as once the player tracks down all the intel and cracks the secrets behind them, Mason and Woods are the ones sent out to take down the targets, reminding you that they're still there. These missions also seem to be last-minute additions because their maps that they take place on are just pulled from multiplayer. Is any of this really a problem with the game? No. I think it's just interesting to point out, and actually commend Raven on doing a good job of incorporating these older characters in a game they weren't even supposed to be in originally. Especially with how the game wraps up, it's very fitting how well it fits thematically into the Black Ops universe, as there are some things I imagine were always in the game, but we'll talk about more of that later. For now, we come to what is actually probably my favorite mission in the game. In order to break into the KGB building, Adler and company need to utilize their asset on the inside. Dmitry Belikov is the head of security for KGB headquarters, and also a mole for the CIA. His job now is to get Adler and Bell into the building undetected. That's a tough enough task, but there's a problem. The KGB knows there's a mole, and Kravchenko returns to flush him out of hiding, but the Russian bruiser isn't alone.
There's a mole within the KGB. The committee wants someone from the first chief directorate to oversee Colonel Kravchenko's investigation. If you've not met him already, this is Imran Zakayev.
Imran Zakayev. Imran Zakayev.
Zakayev. Imran Zakayev.
In a shocking turn of events, a younger Imran Zakayev from Call of Duty 4 appears in this game. Believe it or not, this is the first major crossover Call of Duty has had with the other sub-series at work. Before this moment, it was assumed that each studio had their own series and universe to play around in. Treyarch had their Black Ops series, Sledgehammer had Advanced Warfare, and Infinity Ward had the Modern Warfare games, plus a few. But here, for the first time, we have a connection point between two of them, linking both the Black Ops games and the Modern Warfare games as existing in the same universe. Following this, the idea of a Call of Duty cinematic universe would further be explored via connections in Warzone and the seasonal changes to Verdansk. But this connection does raise a question, just which games are connected to one another? As far as makes sense to me, we have a few branching timelines at work here. In the olden days of the PS3 and 360, we have separate timelines and events. The original Modern Warfare games exist separately from the original 4 Black Ops games. Easy enough to understand. Beginning in 2019, though, is when we're introduced to the Call of Duty cinematic universe and our more connected timeline. Beginning in the 1940s, we have our World War II games. This consists of Treyarch's World at War and Sledgehammer's 2 titles in the timeline. Moving forward to the Cold War, we have Black Ops 1 and this game, followed by the flashback missions from Black Ops 2. Then, moving forward to present day, we have the new Modern Warfare trilogy from Infinity Ward. From this connected timeline, we'll be excluding the 2025 missions from Black Ops 2, as the future tech and world featured in that game clashes with the concurrently set Modern Warfare games. And as for the advanced movement games in Black Ops 4, they can be their own little thing in the future or be left in the trash. They don't really affect anything here, so we'll just choose to ignore them. So thanks to Zakhaev, we now have our connected universe of CoD games. Hopefully that all makes sense. So with that established, let's move on to the actual mission. There's a number of ways that Belikov can get Adler and Bell into the KGB, and it all has to do with General Charkov. Belikov can frame Charkov as the mole, poison him, or have a prisoner do it John Wick style with a pencil. I love all of this. There's a bunch of ways to achieve the same end result, and it's impossible to do all of them on one playthrough. It was satisfying discovering all the different ways to accomplish the mission, execute one of them, and then play the game again and do something completely different. Also, if the turncoat agent from the Berlin mission is still alive, then you have the option to kill him here. Overall, the pacing in Cold War moves quick and it makes the game feel shorter than most despite running about the same length. I think Raven adding in so much to do in missions like these really helps add substance to the game overall. We always know the shooting will be good, so them taking the time to give us extra stuff to do like this, I think is a treat. It really helps reinforce the Spycraft Undercover aspect of the series as well. So eventually, Belikov manages to get Charkov's keycard and lets Adler and Bell inside the building. From there, they have a job to do and grab the intel they need and shoot their way out, taking Belikov with them once his cover is blown. With the intel recovered from the KGB, the team's next mission is to finally take out Perseus, so Adler says to clear up any remaining tasks. If the player hasn't finished the 2 operations, this is the time to do so. As I mentioned earlier, these are more optional missions featuring Mason and Woods. In order to play them, the player must first uncover intel found across the game to find out where to go. One mission requires an encrypted floppy disk to be cracked, which more than likely will include a short YouTube tutorial to figure out the cipher. Once that's done, Mason and Woods track down and kill a CIA turncoat being escorted out of the US by Perseus' agents. In the other, the duo must kill a KGB officer helping Perseus that's also in charge of a spy ring in Europe. Aside from taking him out, the player must also figure out who the spies are from a list of suspects. Neither mission has much impact on the final story, but it's a cool feature to help keep the player involved in the narrative. I'm really glad they put in the effort to include something like this. So with all the loose ends cleared up, the team tracks one of the sleeper agents to Cuba, where he'll presumably help Perseus smuggle a bomb into the US. Adler says they have a job to do, and so the team heads to Cuba to find the nuke. When they get there, they find that Perseus has escaped with the launch commands and has killed the sleeper cell of scientists helping him. One of them manages to tell Park that Perseus now has the ability to activate all the Greenlight nukes before he dies, and the team rushes to exfil before Cuban reinforcements arrive. While Adler, Mason, and Woods exfil on the ground, Bell, Park, and Lazar are hitching a ride the Metal Gear Solid way via Skyhook. Before they can all hook on though, they're injured in an RPG blast, and Bell only has time to save one person. Canonically, Bell chooses Park and the 2 escape while Lazar is left to die. Returning to base wounded and out of time, Adler has Sims and Park strap Bell to a gurney. Adler says that Bell is the key to finding Perseus and injects him with a cocktail of drugs as he asks him to remember his time in Vietnam when they last encountered the villain. From here, Bell's forced to relive the same events over and over in different ways, each loop becoming more disorienting than the last. Adler keeps pushing the player towards opening a red door, but the player can disobey and head down the wrong path over and over, which will only make Adler more insistent that he opens the red door. If the player keeps disobeying, red doors will just begin to fall from the sky and you'll become trapped in a never-ending hallway. While weird disorienting, the truth finally becomes clear. Bell is not who he thinks he is. The characteristics given to him at the beginning of the game by the player were the new personality the CIA gave to him to make him a perfect agent. Bell isn't even really his name. Bell is nothing more than a construct of a personality given to a mortally wounded agent who used to work for Perseus. The person we know as Bell was shot by one of the Iranian hostage crisis masterminds back at Turkey and left for dead. Following Adler, Mason, and Woods' raid on the airfield, Adler found Bell barely clinging to life in the back of the truck he was shot in. With him being their only living lead, Adler and the CIA wiped Bell's mind using the MK-Ultra program so he'd be more willing to turn on Perseus. From there, to keep Bell in line, Adler only needed a code phrase to prompt the programming along.
The CIA's mind control program has had a great deal of success with implanted memories.
You want me to tell them about my time in Vietnam?
Lastly, you'll need a command phrase to trigger the implanted memories.
We have a job to do.
You had to reach the Soviet bunker.
It appears the subject's programming is beginning to take hold.
We've got a job to do. We've known each other for years. Fought together, bled together, been through the hell of Vietnam together. We've got a job to do.
And now the training's complete. You just need to give the subject a name.
Bell.
While ultimately similar to the twist in the original Black Ops, I think this was handled masterfully. Playing as a brainwashed KGB agent working alongside the West to undermine your former allies is a great flip on the Alex Mason story, and what helps make this work is the way it's presented. Unlike Black Ops, which fed you clues along the way to help you realize something was up, Cold War more or less plays Bell straight and doesn't tip their hand that something was up until the end. Adler's code phrase of "we have a job to do" is worked seamlessly into the dialogue, and you never pick up on it being a trigger. It also helps feed the player choices found throughout the campaign, and they all come to a head right here. With the truth revealed to Bell, Adler asks where Perseus is, and he thinks back to his time with the group. Bell tells Adler that Perseus is in Solovetsky, and they gear up to shut down Perseus' operation once and for all. If I have one complaint about this ending, it's that it's a little short and feels a tad anticlimactic. Adler and Bell rush around the Solovetsky monastery to destroy anti-aircraft guns so bombers can take out the radio towers that'll transmit the activation code for the nuclear bombs. When the last cannon is clear, the bombers take out the radio towers and stop the signal from being broadcast, saving the world. After Hudson goes over the investigation and ties up our loose ends, we have one final moment with Adler and Bell, where Adler ties up his own loose end.
Heroes have to make sacrifices. That's why when I ask you for one more, I hope you understand. It was never personal.
And with that, we end the campaign. Or at least one ending. Rewinding the clock, Bell can choose differently when it comes to where Perseus is hiding. Bell can instead lead Adler's team to Duga in Ukraine and set up an ambush to get revenge on his kidnappers. If that happens, we get the obviously non-canon ending where all the nukes go off and Bell personally puts down all of his former teammates, including Mason and Woods. While non-canon to a hilarious degree, I love that Raven even went the route of including this, and why I'm not too upset that either ending is a little short. They took a final level and basically cut it in half to make two alternate endings, essentially. So no matter which ending you choose, that concludes the campaign. Honestly, I really enjoyed this campaign, and it was a breath of fresh air. After playing through the Black Ops 3 campaign and wondering just what drugs Treyarch was on when developing Black Ops 4, having Raven actually care about a story mode was really welcome. And it's a small wonder this game feels more in line with earlier entries in the series than the latter ones, as Raven managed to get key writing talent from the first two games back on board to help with Cold War. And I haven't mentioned it in this series up until now, but you want to know who one of those writers is? David Goyer, one of the writers behind the Dark Knight trilogy. So it's nice to see some talent back in the writer's room after whatever the heck Black Ops 3 was. Raven also threw in several things to make the gameplay a little more dynamic than usual as well. Aside from the conversations you can have and the dialogue options to go with them, players can also use bodies as human shields and stick grenades on them to take out groups of clustered enemies. I think that's really cool. Now, I do have two small critiques about the gameplay though. One is that I had to turn off the hit marker sound. Something about it just rubbed me the wrong way, and I don't really know why. Turning that sound off, I found myself enjoying the game much more than before. I prefer the campaigns without hit markers anyway, so this wasn't a huge deal for me. Secondly, compared to Modern Warfare 2019, this game feels older and not as responsive comparatively. That's because despite coming out a year after Modern Warfare, Cold War doesn't use that new game engine, and Treyarch and Raven use the old engine all previous CoDs have been developed on, mostly because it was quicker given their limited time. While they overhauled it to match Modern Warfare as much as possible, it doesn't hold a candle. And that's partially why at the time I didn't care for this game and never played the campaign until I got around to making this video. I go more in depth in my Modern Warfare campaign video, but to me, that game was a revelation of what Call of Duty could strive to be, and it made me look at all of Treyarch's efforts in that console generation with even more disdain. So when Cold War was announced and I played the beta, I gave up on it fairly quickly. Looking back, I feel like I was wrong to do so. While it doesn't feel as good to play as Modern Warfare 2019, this campaign does a lot to make up for the previous mistakes Treyarch made of the Black Ops series. It's just funny it took another studio swooping in to do that for them. Playing it now, it does seem like the true sequel and successor to what we never really got for Black Ops 1. While Black Ops 2 does continue the story well, its multiplayer is set in the future. Cold War feels like a natural continuation of the setting of where Black Ops 1 could have gone if Black Ops 2 hadn't jumped to the future, and it's funny that it contains lots of maps from Black Ops 2 but with a 1980s aesthetic. Since beating the campaign, I found myself actually getting into the multiplayer a little bit, so it's clearly doing something right. Some points to Treyarch for that, I suppose. And with that, we have the end of the Black Ops series for now. It's crazy to think that these games have been running since 2008. They might have gone off the rails here and there, but with Raven handling the story and Treyarch able to stay focused on what they do best with the multiplayer, I'm actually eager to see how Black Ops 6 turns out. Given that the teams have now had 4 years to work on it, I'm hopeful that they've got something good in store for us. And once it does come out, you can bet I'll be back to take a deep dive into the game's campaign. So until then, thank you for taking a walk with me through Treyarch's legacy, and here's hoping it's still in good hands with Raven Software.